Alexander's most feared and elite infantry were men in their 60s and 70s. They were never defeated in battle, and they remained unbeaten long after he was gone, until politics finished what armies could not. This is how the Silver Shields came to be, and why they had to be destroyed. The origins of the Argyraspides, the Silver Shields, are unclear because the sources are thin. What is clear is that the conditions that produced them emerged under Philip II. Philip doesn't just improve the army, he rebuilds how Macedon fights, creating a professional force that depends on discipline, coordination, and combined arms. It's during these reforms that the need for an elite guard infantry almost certainly appears. We don't know whether they fought as a distinct unit at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, the battle that brought Greece under Macedonian rule. Our sources don't say, but it's very likely that the men who will later be known as the Silver Shields were already there, fighting in Philip's army, surviving his wars, and being shaped by the system that would eventually make them elite. Before Philip's reforms, Macedon relied on loosely organized levies supported by noble cavalry. Infantry fought in traditional hoplite style, short spears, heavy shields, and dense formations that worked well in set battles. Philip dismantled this system. He replaced the hoplite model with a new phalanx, armed with the sarissa, a pike over 16 feet long. To make this work, soldiers were more lightly armored, using smaller shields hung around the neck, freeing both hands to control the weapon. At the same time, Philip introduced a standing army. Service became professional. Soldiers trained year-round and drilled constantly in formation movement. This created something rare in the ancient world, a permanent, disciplined force loyal to the crown rather than to the local elites. The Macedonian phalanx was no longer a seasonal militia, it was a military machine. Philip's system was impressive, but it had a core limitation and a vulnerability. The Macedonian phalanx was powerful, but even less agile than the traditional hoplite. Armed with long sarissas, it was designed to move forward and stay locked in formation. This made it devastating head-on, but almost dangerously rigid. The flanks were vulnerable, and the formation became fragile when crossing broken or uneven terrain. To solve this, Philip introduced a third element into his army, a Royal Guard infantry corps of Hypaspists, the very unit that will later become known as the famed Silver Shields in Alexander's time. Their purpose was to provide mobility and cohesion where the phalanx could not. Positioned on the critical right flank, they protected the phalanx's exposed side and maintained a connection with the companion cavalry as it maneuvered for decisive attacks. Acting as a hinged force, they were heavy enough to hold ground, but flexible enough to adjust as the battlefield shifted. While the phalanx fixed the enemy in place and the cavalry delivered the hammer blow, the Hypaspists ensured the entire formation stayed connected. Without them, the Macedonian system risked tearing itself apart in motion. This is where recruitment matters, because this role isn't for average line infantry. One ancient tradition preserved through later writers says these guards were picked men, selected from the most experienced among the Macedonians. The kings wanted physically capable soldiers, reliable under pressure, serving close to the royal command structure rather than as a local levy. This flexibility also made them ideal for rapid detachments, securing key ground, exploiting gaps in enemy line, or reinforcing weak points during the chaotic fighting. Phalangites were less effective on walls or narrow streets and weren't as experienced fighting in more flexible scenarios. But Hypaspists could climb, clear gates, and fight in confined spaces with spear and sword. They served as assault troops when precision mattered more than mass. In effect, they were the army's problem solvers, deployed wherever discipline, mobility, and reliability were required. This versatility is what truly separated them from ordinary infantry. The Hypaspists were equipped to balance protection, mobility, and versatility. Hypaspists used large, round shields closer to the traditional hoplite. The primary weapon was a shorter spear, and they carried a Kephos sword as a secondary weapon for close fighting. Armor was practical rather than excessive, bronze or linen cuirasses, greaves, and helmets typical of Macedonian heavy infantry. By the time Alexander launched his campaign into Asia, the Hypaspists had already earned a reputation as Philip conquered Greece and secured Macedonian hegemony, and now their number had grown to 3,000. But it was Alexander's conquest of the Achaemenid Empire where the reputation as being almost invincible grew, and when they finally earned the moniker the Silver Shields. At the Battle of Granicus, Alexander's attack is at a contested river crossing, and the right-wing assault needs infantry that can stay coherent as momentum and terrain break formations. The shield bearers are positioned as the first infantry partner to the companions, there to secure the hinge and support the attack. At Issus, the terrain compresses the battle and makes cohesion the main problem. Alexander drives the right forward aggressively, but the phalanx cannot advance evenly. Arrian says the Macedonian line became disjointed toward the right because the king's wing surged ahead while the center struggled to keep pace, slowed by the steep banks and difficult ground at the river crossing. In that kind of fight, there's a real risk of separation, two battles forming where there should be one. The unit stationed on the cavalry infantry seam has a simple job: keep the right connected to the main line as the attack accelerates. At Gaugamela, their battlefield utility is explicit. Arrian again places the select shield-bearing guards immediately beside the companion cavalry. They are positioned to move with a decisive arm while still fighting as disciplined infantry. When Persian sided chariots punch through openings, Arrian has the royal shield-bearing guards among those who overpowered, dragged down, and finished off the chariots that got through, stopping the breakthrough from turning into a panic behind the lines. They're doing ugly, practical work, sealing disruptions so Alexander can keep the right wing moving and then drive the wedge towards Darius. It was in Alexander's next campaign in India where they finally got their name, the Silver Shields. After years of loyal service and playing a vital role in his most important battles, Curtius Rufus claims that as Alexander prepared to push deeper east, he didn't want his army outshone by the rich-looking arms he'd heard were common in India. So he ordered a visual escalation: shields fitted with silver plates, horses given golden bits, and cuirasses ornamented with gold and silver. The point wasn't comfort or protection, it was display. Then came Alexander's debt. It removed the one authority powerful enough to keep the elite formations politically neutral. The Apaspists were veterans, many in their 60s and some even being in their 70s. They had enormous status inside the army, and that status became leverage. In the wars of the Diadochi, they could decide who had a claim to the royal army, and every contender knew it. They followed Eumenes because he represented the royal cause. Eumenes was a Greek, not a Macedonian noble, and had risen as Alexander's secretary before becoming a general, an awkward position when commanding royal guard veterans. The relationship was always unstable, Macedonian guards taking orders from a non-Macedonian general, with satraps and rival commanders constantly trying to pull them away. Even in the sources that admire their battlefield record, you can feel the tension. They are treated less like a unit to be commanded and more like a block that must be managed. That tension snaps at Gabin. By the time of Gabin in 316 BC, Alexander had been dead for 7 years and his empire was already tearing itself apart. Former generals, Antigonus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, and others were fighting to carve out kingdoms from what remained. Eumenes claimed to fight in the name of Alexander's royal family, while Antigonus, one of Alexander's senior generals, aiming to dominate Asia. The campaign leading to Gabin was not about ideology, it was about who controlled the last intact pieces of Alexander's army. In that struggle, the Silver Shields were the most valuable asset on the field. Veterans of decades of war, still feared by everyone who faced them. Tactically, the Silver Shields do what they always do. They win their fight and defeat Antigonus' phalanx, but the battle ends inconclusively. However, Antigonus was able to seize the troops' baggage camp, including decades of accumulated plunder and personal property, and crucially, their families. When Antigonus offers the baggage and families back in exchange for Eumenes, they accept, arrest him, and hand him over. Eumenes is then executed. Antigonus' response tells you what their legacy looked like in real time: fear and distrust. A unit with that much political influence, willing to trade its commander, could do the same thing to him, so he neutralizes it. Plutarch says Antigonus placed him under the command in a distant satrapy on the border of India and orders that they be used in small detachments on dangerous service, to be treated as expendable. That is effectively the end of the Silver Shields as a coherent formation. Not a heroic last stand, but an administrative solution to a political problem. Their skill made them indispensable and powerful. Their influence made them dangerous. That combination ultimately sealed their fate.